Let's now welcome in Mike Noble, founder and CEO of Noble Predictive Insights, to give us those insights that he found from some of his latest polling. Mike, appreciate you joining us here for the Center Square Daily, and we'll talk about those latest numbers, but with the voter ID proposal expected to dominate headlines coming out of the U.S. Senate this week, what did you guys find out late last year about voter sentiment around voter ID and mail-in balloting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And from the recent voter voice poll by the Center Square, which is a big national survey, we did over 2,000 respondents, and we found that Donald Trump is actually on the right side of the people when it comes to this issue. So not only Democrats are split on this issue with 49% supporting it, with 41% opposing it, Trump's proposed voter ID requirement. Republicans, no surprise, they're unanimously on board with the president, 92 to 6%, only 6% opposition. But the true tiebreaker, those true independents, so which is about 10-15% of the total electorate that don't lean one side or the other in the Republican-Democrat fight, they're 3-1 in support of the president. So I don't agree with them that 100% of people support it, but the overwhelming majority are very much on board, and they're strong majorities among Hispanic Latino voters and African-American voters.
It's interesting, the president using, kind of a type of polling. I don't know where he's getting his data, but, here's the president yesterday talking about this very issue.
The Save America Act, voter ID with a picture, right? That's a 99% issue. Even among Democrats, Democrats poll at 89% on that. And then they have proof of citizenship. And then they have no mail-in ballots. No mail-in ballots.
Yeah, the president known for being somewhat bombastic and speaking off the cuff, but you're indicating that he seems to be on the right trail. This is a very popular issue across the political spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly popular across the political spectrum, especially key voter blocks. Again, Hispanic Latinos, African Americans, but again, true independents, that swing vote, that's really important in general elections. And even Democrats are split on this issue, which is interesting and also telling. So he may be ingratiating just a little bit. However, he's not wrong to say, in the latest polling by the Center Square shows, voters are very much on board. And I think this is why it's a good issue. He's going to press it. And Democrats, this is kind of a bit of a loser for them politically.
Voter ID is just one issue, but he's also been pretty adamant about mail-in voting and saying that that needs to be restricted quite a bit. Tell us about that.
It's interesting. So this one is kind of a little juxtaposed to the previous issue. So Trump is dead on when it comes to requiring voter ID. However, I think he's on the opposite side when it comes to banning mail-in voting. Mail-in voting, decent support among Republicans, 77% in favor, 20% opposed. But basically the same amount are in opposition, though, of Democrats. So the Republicans and Democrats kind of cancel each other out. They're very polarized on this mail-in voting issue. But those all-important independents, by about 50 to 36, they're in opposition against the proposed ban. And what's even more interesting, when you look at the Western U.S., the broad mail-in vote that has much more broad mail-in voting habits compared to some other areas, like in states like Arizona and Nevada, they've been doing early voting a lot longer than some of these new states, post-COVID. And we saw that among the Western U.S., there's definitely a bit more of opposition to this ban, especially the folks that have been around it and seen it for a little bit. There's more opposition there compared to the newcomers to mail-in voting.
Another issue that you guys with Noble Predictive Insights found late last year in the polling for the Center Square was about election integrity and trust in elections. And some interesting data you guys found there, especially as we're now in that 2026 election year.
Yeah, it's interesting with when it comes to trust in elections. Like, Republicans are now more confident in the fairness of elections. 72% of Republicans are actually more confident in the upcoming 2026 elections compared to Democrats. Only 47% of them are confident, and those independents in the middle, 45%. So interestingly, just a few years ago, Republicans were the biggest negative Nancy's when it came to confidence in elections. However, 2024 turned out pretty well for them from an electoral win standpoint, and now they're actually feeling very bullish regarding the upcoming election, where Democrats and independents a little more tepid in their confidence. So interesting world we live in.
No question, especially in your insights with the polling you've done. 2,500 people polled, and just the mix that you have of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, including those true independents. And I do want to touch on that here in a moment to kind of drill down a little bit on some of the absolute latest data that you have for the center square. But here's the president talking about how he wants to have the voter ID law brought up and to restrict mail-in voting, but he's also injecting a few other ideas that he's said he wants to amend that bill with, and here he is again yesterday in the Oval Office.
Then I added on no men playing in women's sports, and I added in no transgender surgery, the mutilation of our children. We have no mutilation of our children, no transgender. I think they say that's an 80% issue. I think they're 99% issue.
Again, Mike, he says it's a 99% issue to, not mutilate children with transgender issues and the men and women's sports issue. How far off is he, or is he also on the right track there?
Again, this is another one. He's not wrong on that. The majority of the public is against, the integration of transgender sports, so they believe in banning that. However, it's not 100%. I mean, I've been doing polling for decades, and I would say that I have yet to find any issue that's 100%. Like, even if you believe, like, hey, is freedom the most important thing in the United States? Like, you'll get like 98%. You're always gonna have a few percent off. But like this 2/3 of the electorate shows that they should allow, the Supreme Court should allow states and localities to be able to ban transgender women from competing in women's sports. I mean, that's not 100%. But I mean, again, that's a really good political issue. So again, I think he's in a good position on that one, but it's not 100. But 2/3 is pretty close.
Some other issues from the latest polling that you released just this month, and again, people can find this at thecentersquare.com. If you click on polls, you'll be able to read more about these and other issues. But the idea of what is topping people's minds heading into this election, we'll touch on some of the breakdown there. But do people think that it's inflation, or is it some social issues like abortion? Break this down for us and what these key issues for voters really tells us that politicians need to be thinking about heading into the election in November.
Yeah, so when you look at this, there's a couple ways to ask top issue. What's your most important one? Or, hey, what's your top three? And I think how the Center Square asked it in the survey is probably the more realistic way. People usually have a couple issues that top their mark. So when we look at it, you see that what really screams out to me is that pocketbook issues are really the most front and center. You have inflation number one at 37%, which has been the highest recorded in the poll and was the same back in October. So again, the inflation pain point is number one. Number two is healthcare. And I know from other research done is that when drilling down into it, it's not access to care or quality care, it's really cost of care. So whether it's your medical prices or medical insurance pricing, that's where the big pain point. Government corruption, I'd say it's almost a pocketbook too, because again, you have what you're getting hit spending wise, but also, hey, the government needs to kind of rein in the government corruption and kind of the wastefulness that they've been doing. And then the economy is number four. And you notice that everything after that, you had immigration number five, but everything else below that, like kind of all the social issues have really taken a back seat. So if you have the main takeaway to see right now, the electorate, it's pocketbook. It's the economy, stupid, as you've heard some folks say in the past. I mean, that's 100% what we're seeing right now. And I think that's going to be the dominant issue heading the election. Whichever party can, I guess, best address those concerns among voters is going to be doing well come November.
And one of the questions you also asked in the most recent polling data, again, you can find at thecentersquare.com, is about the direction of the country. And seems to kind of go hand in hand as well with the approval rating of Donald Trump. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so Donald Trump's approval rating is not too far off from the direction of the country, but also just the electorate. What does this data point mean? It means, hey, are folks optimistic or pessimistic about the direction? And currently, their majority of the electorate is pessimistic. But also, we've kind of been in this state for the last 8 to 10 years. Just look at the past elections for president. I mean, you had Trump was elected initially, and then Biden won, and then you had Trump won again. But also, all three of those presidencies, they all won with roughly 50% of the vote, but within a year into their term, all three of them had really terrible job approval ratings. So they really sank. And it's just kind of like you have an A-B choice between the red team and blue team, or Republican, Democrat. And so folks just really are unhappy. So the pendulum going back between the parties, it used to go longer, 8-year terms, et cetera. But now it's just kind of bouncing back and forth because there's really not a third option, but they're really not happy with either of the sides these days.
Well, I think that leads us to, breaking down and drilling down into who exactly is answering questions from your polls. And let's talk about those true independents, that swing voter, so to speak, and how crucial they are to determining the wins of the country.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny for a lot of folks. I get, politics is basically a full contact sport for I like to call it for nerds, right? And so when you look at this, is that these two teams are competing, is that, what's funny is that a lot of the die is already cast when it comes to electoral outcomes. I mean, you hear a term a lot used by consultants, Democrats vote Democrat, Republicans vote Republican, and you battle for the folks in the middle. Thing is, in this really hyper polarized time frame that we're in, is that if you look at the overall electorate, especially you find it through the generic ballot, like, hey, do you normally vote for Republican or Democrat? I mean, usually about 85% of them are picking either Democrat or Republican. So that 10 to 15% that's left in the middle, what we like to call true independents, that don't lean one side or the other, like they're pretty party agnostic. I mean, that's what this poll captures, and they ultimately are the ones that decide the general election. So again, the calculus is, hey, you want to turn out your base, right? Make sure they're motivated to get out to vote. And then the other portion is, hey, win those folks in the middle that are small but mighty. But that group in the middle, that disenfranchised 10, 15%, they've chosen who the president has been the last 3 elections in a row. And again, they're not happy. And this poll is one of the unique polls that actually has a large sample size of this very hard to reach group, where we can track them over time to see where the political winds are blowing with them. So again, it's super unique, but I hope that explains it a little bit.
No, absolutely. And I think it's going to be interesting to see again as we get through this election year, maybe right before the election, what some of the sentiments are. And we'll be looking at Mike Noble, the CEO and founder of Noble Predictive Insights, and all the data that you're able to produce from reaching out to that broad base of individuals answering these types of questions and what's on the minds of voters. Greatly appreciate you taking time with us here today for the Center Square Daily.